Hi, this is Stan. Welcome back to the Crow's Nest Railroad. Ever wonder how you get large-scale train wheels like this? I've been wondering about it. Let's find out. Well, the guys at the Saguaro Central 15-inch gauge railroad have been wondering what their needs might be down the road in the future to have more wheels for rolling stock, and they are not readily available. You don't buy them on Amazon. They have to be made, and they're very expensive if you pay someone to machine a large wheel, 9 inches or 10 inches in diameter. So what would it take for us to try and make some wheels on our own? Well, we want to do an experiment, and oddly enough, that experiment begins in my wood shop. So let's head on in. So why in the world would we start here in the wood shop? Well, here's the plan. There's a community college that does a cast iron molten pour for some of their students once a year in the fall. And that's coming up in a few weeks. And so what we would like to try is make a mold where we can take it over there and they can pour some cast iron into it. We can make a wheel or two, and then with that rough wheel we could put it on the lathe and try and mill it down to what we could use on the railroad down the road at the Saguaro Central. Probably 9 or 10 inch wheel, something of that diameter. And so what I want to try to do is, using some MDF, I'm going to try to cut out some circles and stack together like a Dagwood sandwich a replica of the wheel made out of MDF that we want to use to push into this special kind of sand so that we can create this cavity to be filled with molten cast iron. I don't know, it sounds like quite an ordeal, and we're going to learn every step of the way, but let me get busy. I got to get some MDF and start cutting out some circles, so here we go. So I was able to get a quarter sheet of 1-inch MDF and a quarter sheet of 3/4 inch, and I'm going to sandwich the pieces together to make our 2 3/4 inch thick blank. So next I had to cut a piece of scrap plywood. I think it's like 1/4 inch, maybe a little less. Got to set this up on the router so that we can create our little pinholes to create the circles that we need. So I will be measuring off the radius of the needed circles here. And for a little pin, I'm going to use this machine screw because I want it to attach to this with threads and stick through, but in some cases the holes are so small that it has to go between this plywood and the metal housing of the router. So basically I have to create a little countersunk hole for this lid. So I want these threads to bite in, but only like for the first 1/4 inch or so. So I'm going to really polish the threads on the other so they will not have a tendency to dig in to our MDF. So to do that, take a little drill and a file, and we're just going to smooth out some of those threads like this. Okay, we've got a little center hole here for this little pin, and the router will cut this circle. This is the biggest circle and the thinnest piece. This is the 3/4 inch. This is going to define the flange diameter. So I'll start with the easiest and we'll go from there. So let's get this mounted back on the router. So I've set my dimension from the cutting edge of the bit to the center of this pin, and this is plywood, so it's not machining accurate. I just want to make sure that the minimum is covered, and if any error occurs, which it can easily do when you're dealing with wood, I want to end up with a little fatter cut so that when the ultimate wheel is cast and machined, any slight thickness can be carved off. I don't want it to be undersized. So here we go. We're not going to cut all the way through the 3/4 inch MDF in one pass. We're going to nibble it away, taking a little bit each time. So I needed to really quick trim down my little jig here a little bit on the table saw so that I could get next to where I've got it clamped. So let's finalize this cut. All right, there's our blank. Let's give it a quick measurement. All right, 9 1/4 plus maybe a 64th, but it's just a teensy bit fat over 9 1/4. Perfect. Let's cut one more. Okay, here's our 6 circles. So basically, for the widest part, that'll be the flange. This is a piece of 3/4 MDF, and it's the widest circle. And then 2 cuts out of 1 inch MDF. We needed a total of 2 3/4 inches. Back to front from the back of the flange, and you can see I was able to do a little fancy pants here. I think I may try and print out some letters for the Saguaro Central on the 3D printer and maybe epoxy them in here so they would stamp that on the wheel. I don't know, we'll see. Now, it took a fair number of passes to do this. Here's the jig, and you can see how many different radii I had to compute on that. There's our little guide screw. And really, it's fairly simple. MDF is a great product to use with a router because it's so uniform. It's basically glue and sawdust. But I cut this pattern first before I cut this out of the piece of MDF. That's, I think, the smart way to do it, rather than trying to cut these small circles with this detached. So it gives us this nice profile, and it's less waste on the metal that has to be machined down. So what I have to do now is I have to glue these up. And then, once I get these tight bond together,
I think we'll try to put it up on the lathe and put just a slight bevel. This pattern I think will pull out of the mold better if there's just a slight pitch inward. And everything should be oversized to allow for shrinkage of the metal and for tooling of the metal once it gets down to the final metal lathe. But everything seemed to have gone pretty well. On to the next step.
And the printer's busy printing out some letters.
And after we turn a little bit of a bevel on these edges so it'll come out of the mold more easily, then we'll glue in these letters. All right, Bob put these up on the lathe. You can see we got the letters glued in there. And got everything chamfered and beveled so that it will release from the mold. So now what I've got to do is hit this with a little filler primer so that I can smooth this all out, and then we got to seal it all. Next step is I wanted to seal these so that none of the sand would try and stick to it in the mold. So did a couple of sandable primer coats and then just topped it off with some green that I had on the shelf just to give it a little bit of a smooth texture on the outside. So here we are. Someday this is going to be a wheel.
Well, that's going to wrap up part one. Now we've got our 2 wooden wheels, and next time we're going to head out to an amazing metal shop and mini foundry where we're going to take our wheels now, our MDF wheels, and we're going to press them into the special Permabond sand and make the actual mold containers that we need to have the cast iron poured in. So that's right here next time on the Crow's Nest Railroad. Don't miss it. See you then.